When we think of the Middle Ages, we imagine knights, castles, and holy wars. But few dare to ask what happened behind closed doors, where passion, superstition, and strict religion created some of the strangest sexual customs history has ever known. This is the story of bizarre sexual practices of medieval peoples, where I'll show you how women's virginity was tested, how the church controlled when couples could make love, and how strange beliefs shaped the most intimate parts of life. In the medieval world, virginity was a currency, one traded not in coin, but in reputation, land, and alliances. Especially among noble families, a bride's chastity was a matter of political survival. Her virtue wasn't simply symbolic, it was proof of lineage. A pure woman gave birth to legitimate heirs, and legitimacy, in a world of power passed by blood, was everything. To preserve this fragile virtue, a number of bizarre customs emerged. One of the most well-known was the public display of the blood-stained bedsheet. After a wedding night, chambermaids or female relatives would enter the marital room to inspect the linens. If blood marked the cloth, the family rejoiced. Trumpets might sound. In some parts of Europe, the sheet was paraded through the streets. If no blood appeared, whispers, rumors, sometimes annulments. The pressure on the bride was unbearable, and because hymens don't always bleed, many were punished unfairly. Some even went so far as to cut themselves subtly before the wedding night, just enough to stain the cloth and protect their future. Midwives were sometimes hired for virginity checks before marriage. These women would manually inspect a girl's genitals, often without real understanding of what they were looking for. The hymen, a misunderstood part of anatomy, became a mythologized barrier between honor and disgrace. There were even herbal tests. In some German regions, girls were made to sit on boiling decoctions of vinegar and herbs to see if their tightness remained intact. An agonizing ordeal with no medical grounding. What did these customs create? A culture where purity wasn't just a value, it was a sentence. Where a girl's worth rested on a single, unprovable moment. Where the sight of blood became more important than love, consent, or truth. In the age of cathedrals and candlelit altars, the medieval church governed more than prayers. It governed bodies. Sex, the church taught, was holy but dangerous, allowed only within marriage and only for the purpose of creating life. Pleasure alone? That was sin. To keep desire in check, the church issued detailed calendars of abstinence, days, weeks, even months during which sex was forbidden. These weren't few. Sex was banned during Lent, Advent, on the eve of every saint's day, during fasting periods, during pregnancy, and during menstruation. Even Sundays, the holiest day of the week, were often off limits. By some calculations, married couples had fewer than 100 safe nights a year to engage in intimacy without committing sin. The fear wasn't just spiritual, it was physical. Priests warned that children conceived on forbidden nights might be born deformed, cursed, or spiritually flawed. And so, a strange kind of anxiety set in. In some communities, sex calendars were hung in homes, handmade or copied from monasteries, mapping out forbidden periods in red ink. It was a holy version of the modern contraceptive chart, but with no intimacy, no love, just fear of damnation. For couples who struggled to obey, confession was the only remedy. Men confessed they had touched their wives too soon. Women wept over dreams that stirred desire on sacred nights. And yet, behind closed doors, many broke the rules. Desire, after all, is not so easily scheduled, but the guilt was real. Entire generations were raised to believe that pleasure, even with a spouse, was a temptation of the devil. A quiet terror hung in the bedrooms of Christian Europe, not of disease or discovery, but of sin. Church-imposed sex bans. Imagine standing before a courtroom, your wife beside you, your body the accused. In parts of medieval France and England, if a woman claimed her husband could not perform his marital duties, she could file for annulment. The burden then fell on the man to prove he was not impotent. These cases became known as trials by intercourse or impotence trials, and they were as humiliating as they sound. Step 1. A physical examination. Midwives, surgeons, or court-appointed matrons would inspect the man's genitals for size, structure, and signs of arousal. If he could produce an erection under pressure, it was a good start, but not enough. Step 2. A performance test. In some cases, the man was ordered to attempt intercourse with his wife, often in a side chamber of the court or in front of appointed witnesses, clergy, physicians, or noble observers. The observers waited in another room, listening for signs of movement, breath, or completion. Some even checked the woman afterward for physical evidence. It was grotesque and legal. Men who failed were publicly shamed, their marriages annulled, their reputations, often political, destroyed. Some were accused of using magic or witchcraft to deceive. One recorded case from 1370 describes a French knight weeping in court, swearing he had loved his wife but could not perform under such scrutiny. The annulment was granted. His title was lost. Why such drama? Because marriages weren't just emotional. They were contracts. No children meant no heirs. No heirs meant instability. A useless husband could be replaced. Women, though often powerless elsewhere, found some strange legal strength here. But it came at a cost: exposure, embarrassment, and the possibility of never marrying again if the case failed. And through it all, no one asked about the woman's pleasure, only whether the man could plant his seed. In the year 1349, as plague darkened the cities of Europe, they appeared. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Men and women dressed in white, barefoot, heads bowed, marching silently through town squares. In their hands, whips. They were the flagellants, a religious movement that believed self-punishment could purify the soul and save the world from God's wrath. With each crack of the whip across their backs, they sang hymns. Blood stained their garments. Children watched in stunned silence as their parents wept. At first, the church tolerated them, but soon whispers began. Behind closed doors, some began to take pleasure in the pain. Monks wrote of certain brothers who volunteered for whipping more often than required. Nobles, mostly men, began commissioning private flogging sessions under the guise of penance, but with robes removed, candles dimmed, and attendance paid in silver. For some, this became a form of erotic punishment, where pain blurred into pleasure and redemption became arousal. In cloisters, journals speak of monks who begged for more lashes than necessary. One even described the whip as a tongue of God's mercy, a deeply symbolic and sensual image. There were women, too, nuns and lay sisters, who submitted to similar rituals. Some begged to be whipped in silence, their faces covered, believing the pain cleansed their earthly desires. The line between sacred suffering and intimate craving was thin, perhaps thinner than even they understood. In a world where touch was forbidden, where pleasure was shameful, pain became a language of its own. To be a woman in the Middle Ages was to live under the shadow of mystery, especially when it came to the body. Physicians, drawing from ancient texts by Galen and Hippocrates, believed that the womb was not a fixed organ, but a living creature, a wandering thing. They claimed it could move throughout the female body, drifting up toward the lungs, down toward the feet, even coiling near the throat, causing choking, hysteria, or madness. This condition, called the wandering womb, was blamed for everything from anxiety to seizures. The cause? A lack of sexual activity. Unmarried women, widows, or nuns who complained of illness were often told their wombs were restless, craving intercourse, or at the very least, stimulation. And so, the treatments followed. Some physicians prescribed fumigation, placing scented herbs near the vagina, hoping to lure the womb back to its proper place. Others recommended marriage. A husband's embrace, they claimed, anchors the womb. In more extreme cases, vaginal massage was ordered, administered by midwives or, disturbingly, by male doctors with church permission. To modern minds, this seems absurd, even abusive. But at the time, it was accepted science, handed down by philosophers and priests alike. It also reflected something deeper, a fear of female sexuality. Women were believed to be naturally more lustful, more emotional, more chaotic, and their bodies, bleeding monthly, growing life, producing milk, were seen as wild and unstable. So men wrote books, they invented theories, they tried to explain what they didn't understand, and in doing so, they created a narrative where a woman's suffering was always her fault. She needed a man. She needed control. Or else, her body would betray her. In monasteries and villages alike, women carried this burden quietly, knowing that no matter how still they stood, someone would claim that their womb was wandering.